Hi, I'm Jen Rubin, editor-in-chief of The Contrarian. I'm delighted to welcome the legal chief at the ACLU, Mike Zamore. Mike, welcome.
Thanks, Jen. Good to be here.
It is lovely. I can't believe we haven't had you already since you guys have been litigating up a storm. I want to talk to you about this bizarre case of a Columbia student, Mahmoud Khalil, who was grabbed, is the only way where you describe it, spurted off to Louisiana and threatened with deportation. His green card is in order, no arrest, no illegal activity. But the Trump administration, and I guess the Secretary of State specifically, Marco Rubio, don't like his participation in these demonstrations concerning October 7th. I didn't like them either, but I don't see how our Constitution allows them to grab him and deport him for First Amendment activities. Can you explain what's going on here?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I do need to correct the record. I am not the legal chief here at the ACLU. We have a lot of really good, smart litigators who are the ones who are in court every day. But I do run our policy work and our government affairs work, and I'm
I said it correctly.
happy to be here with you. So listen, you're exactly right in describing what happened here, which is that the federal government and the Trump administration decided that they wanted to make an example out of Mr. Khalil and exact a punishment on him for his First Amendment protected activities last year when he was involved in protests on the Columbia campus. And as you said, like people can think he's a hero for the things he said, or they can think he's a villain, and that should be immaterial. In Russia today, if you criticize Putin's war in Ukraine, you go to prison for that, right? If you're in China and you start espousing ideas that the Communist Party of China disagrees with, like you risk a re-education camp. But the whole, the most American thing in the world is to be able to tell the government to go to hell. And and that's what this is about. This is about the right of anybody in this country, whether you're here on a visa or on a green card or you're a U.S. citizen, to be able to speak your mind and not face punishment for the things you say.
Let's suppose the issue was Ukraine. He is a Ukrainian student here on a green card, protested Trump's atrocious behavior in the White House involving President Zelensky of Ukraine. Could Marco Rubio snatch him up and have him deported for that? It seems that so long as you are in contradiction of what Donald Trump, not even any official policy, but what Donald Trump thinks, the position of the government is you can be deported. That can't be what the Constitution says.
No, absolutely not. And you're right. And it's not just limited to deportations, right? I mean, the Associated Press was kicked out of the White House. Why? Because they didn't use Donald Trump's preferred locution for a body of water. Like that's not the way our Constitution works. And the AP has sued, and Mr. Khalil is suing, and others who are being targeted for their speech and their political activities are going to sue. And I think that they will win. They should win. Certainly should win. But I think that the what's insidious here, and I think the thing that's important to call out, is that the administration is doing this not because they think what they're doing is constitutional necessarily. It's because they are trying to get everybody else to fall into line, right? Like punishing speech is, sort of the first page of the authoritarian playbook, because you want to create that anticipatory obedience. You want people to stop criticizing the government, to stop engaging in political activity that they don't like. And if you threaten to drop a hammer on them, and people feel like that is a credible threat, like that's really coming for them, then the pragmatic thing to do is to keep your head down, and that's really what they're banking.
And to state the obvious, you don't need the First Amendment to protect popular speech. You need the First Amendment to protect unpopular speech, because that's what potentially the government could come after you for. I do want to drill down just a little bit that Marco Rubio got involved in this, and people may say, Marco Rubio, he's the Secretary of State. What does he have to do with the deportation? Because of a specific statute that the administration has invoked. Talk a little bit about what that statute is and what it should do and what it shouldn't do.
Yeah. So, there are provisions in the Immigration and Naturalization Act that allow for deportation of people who are immigrants for various causes, right? And there's one provision in there that says if the Secretary of State says that the presence of that person is a harm to foreign policy, then that is one of the grounds for deportation. Um, you know, our legal team could tell you more about the history of that provision and how often it's been used and under what circumstances. But I will say that the circumstances of this case are very, very far afield from what I imagined that the initial idea behind that was. And I know there was the case years, decades ago, where deportation was ordered because I think it was the Nixon administration believed that it would be detrimental to the relationship with Mexico to not deport the person in that situation who was a Mexican national, because the Mexican government had a particular interest there. And I think that, like if you read the statute and you apply a little common sense, like that's what it sounds like, right? Like it's like there's actually a foreign policy implication at the like senior government levels, not because the Secretary of State says, hey, we don't like this person, or we don't like this person's views. It doesn't seem like the way that provision is supposed to be interpreted. And if it is the way that provision was intended to be interpreted, then it would be unconstitutional if it's being applied in this way when, based on content of someone's speech.
And I would like to know in what universe someone protesting on a college campus in a country with a free press undermines our national security and our foreign relations with some other country. It would only impair that relationship if the government controlled speech and it would be seen as permissive. But we don't let the government control speech, which is why it shouldn't be undermining or promoting, frankly, anything. He's a private citizen.
Yeah.
He's not advocating, American policy overseas. It's not a Logan Act violation. It's not any of these other things. Um, there has been there have been allegations that he is somehow linked to Hamas. That is an allegation only. The government has provided no proof whatsoever. And if they don't, frankly, I think this gentleman has been really maligned. What is the relationship between language in our statutes about material support for certain groups and this case, or is there no correlation whatsoever?
Well, the government hasn't provided a lot of information, so it's hard to say exactly what this case is actually about just yet. But I think that the broader issues that you're raising and that you're asking about, I think, are all connected, right? Like this government has been, and actually the president's allies, even prior to the president's election, have been using this question of people's political activity around the war between Israel and Hamas as an excuse for conflating speech in support for terrorism. And we saw this last year, these broad blanket statements calling anybody who was protesting Hamas sympathizers, on campus. And we've seen it with threat to pass legislation that would allow last year to allow the Treasury Secretary to strip a nonprofit of any of its nonprofit status just by virtue of accusing them of providing material support to terrorism, which was clearly intended as a chilling effort at supporting students and others who were protesting. I think that it's really critical here that we kind of return to first principles, right? It's the First Amendment for a reason. Like you said, it's to protect unpopular speech. The ACLU's most famous moment probably is when we represented the right of neo-Nazis to march in a community of Holocaust survivors in Skokie, Illinois. that is certainly not a cause or a group that anybody at the ACLU then or now would support. And the point isn't what the content of the speech is or whether you support that speech. The point is that this act of speaking and of protesting and of political organizing is central to what freedom is, right? If the only things we get to say or the only political activity we can engage in is what Donald Trump or his White House or some other president, some Democratic president in the future says is permissible, then we don't actually have civil liberties, right? We don't actually have freedom. And so that's the point here. And we need to make sure that that those who are for political reasons are trying to merge the idea of support for terrorism, which is this like very expansive, broad-based excuse for government surveillance, for government actions against individuals, for stripping due process. When speech gets conflated with support for terrorism, a whole lot of our rights get eroded really quickly, and so that's what we're trying to stand against.
Coincidentally, there was another action that overlaps the First Amendment that happened today, and that is a law firm, kudos to Williams and Connolly, brought suit on behalf of another law firm that Trump has picked off. He's taken two firms now and tried to exclude them from government buildings, government contracts, essentially tried to destroy their practice, frankly, by painting a big X on their back. And this law firm said, no, thank you. And they got Williams and Connolly, which, as we call it, is a white shoe law firm, very hoity-toity, and they had 14 people sign that complaint. Tell us what the grounds for the complaint are and what you think it says that 14 people signed that complaint.
Yeah. So that is another example of the Trump administration wielding the powers of the federal government as a tool of retribution for Trump's perceived enemy, against Trump's perceived enemies, and for slights that he feels he's experienced in the past. So Perkins Coie's big transgression in Trump's eyes is that he represented Hillary Clinton in 2016, for which they'll never be forgiven. And this is again trying to levy a punishment on a law firm for the clients they represented, absent any sort of allegations of wrongdoing, criminal activity. There's not, I mean, again, like if you read the executive order that came out Thursday against Perkins Coie, like there's not even a pretext, as an administration official quoted in a newspaper said anonymously, they think they can get away with being against Trump, and they're going to pay a price for it. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it was something to that effect. Again, like this is not just an attack on Perkins Coie and an attack on the whole legal profession, which is predicated on everybody gets representation, but it is an attack on the law, right? The rule of law, and the idea that the federal government's actions need to be taken in accordance with its legal authorities and on behalf of the public. Like this is not Donald Trump's, government to wield as he wishes to advance his own personal aims. Like this is our government with laws passed by Congress, our representatives, that are supposed to constrain and direct what he is able to do. He's supposed to be implementing and executing those laws. And so, punishing his enemies is not one of those authorized activities by Congress.
It's bad enough that Trump thinks the Justice Department is his lawyers. Now he's going to tell other people who their lawyers can be, which is really perverse. And I think we come back to this central point that you made. If you allow the government to pick off one or two people, one or two law firms, one or two law schools, as they did with Georgetown, trying to target them for practicing DEI, however they define that amorphous term, then no one is safe. Then it can be you tomorrow or the other guy tomorrow. So I think the message from this has to be collective action. Everybody has to come to the defense, whether it's the AP, whether it's who's going to cover the president in the pool, whether it's somebody getting kicked out of the country because they were in a protest that Trump doesn't like, or it's a law firm representing someone, again, that Trump doesn't like. This is a fundamental attack on the First Amendment. How optimistic, as we wrap this up, are you that the federal courts are going to stand firm on this?
I mean, look, I'm not going to speculate on what courts will do in any given case. I think that the First Amendment has long been a source of bipartisan, kind of influence, and it's been supported by politicians and the public and judges, regardless of their ideology. And I would certainly hope that continues to be the case. I mean, like we talked about, like this is central to all of our rights and freedoms. And you said it so well, Jen. Like the they may be coming for someone else today, but if the government can pick and choose who gets to be approved and who gets punished, based on the speech, then like any of us are potential targets. And I'd like to say that if everybody lets the bully pick on the weak and vulnerable kid, and just keeps their head down hoping they're not going to get noticed, like we're all going to lose our lunch money in the end.
Exactly.
We have to come together and stand up for these values, because fundamentally, like these values are what protect all of us. And it's if you need self-interest to be motivated here, you should still have it.
Absolutely. Well, listen, thanks, Mike, for all you're doing. You and your fellows over at the ACLU are in court. They're litigating, often alongside my partner in crime, Norm Eisen, who the government has also tried to go after, but that's another story. And thank you for everything you are doing to uphold the Constitution, American values. Good luck, and we'll have you back, I'm sure, to talk about more of these cases.
Well, thanks, Jen. Proud to be a contrarian with you, and we're grateful for all you're doing, and we'll keep up the fight together.